Ahojte maturanti, dnešnú hodinu som vám nahral na YouTube, dúfam, že vám všetko ide, že počujete dobre zo školy. Tak ako každú hodinu, tak vám teda prednesiem hodinovú prednášku, takúto na diaľku. Čo vás vyzývam, decká, aby som si zistil vašu účasť, keďže teraz tá hodina nepôjde cez Microsoft Teams, tak mi prosím zodpovedzte počas hodiny otázku, ktorú vám v tejto chvíli zapisujem ohľadom studenej vojny. Sú to veci, ktoré už určite poznáte, takže dnes to bude také veľmi brief, také veľmi rýchle a aby ste vedeli v podstate zodpovedať, alebo aby som vedel teda zapísať absencie, tak stačí mi odpovedať. No a myslím, že aby ste vy to vedeli zodpovedať, na to netreba nič nejaké ťažké. Ešte teraz neviem, ale v piatok vám teda zapisujem, dávam, takže už teraz môžete odpovedať. No a hodinu vám odporúčam si vypočuť znovu, keďže by sme si takto ukončili dejepis a na budúcu hodinu už pôjdeme cez opakovanie tém, ktoré máme a ktoré budete potrebovať na veľký test v apríli, ktorému sa určite nevyhnete. Čo to znamená aj pre vás, uvidíme dnes, keďže ja to nahrávam v útorok. Dúfam, že sa už dozvieme nejaké nové veci ohľadom návratu do škôl. Ideálne by bolo, keby ste sa vy vrátili do školy. Pre vás na tomto piatkovom seminári to znamená, že my si napíšeme test, ktorý bude z 20. storočia v angličtine. No samozrejme neskôr, keď doberieme, tak bude to isté aj v slovenčine tento veľký test. Dobre, takže poďme na to. So today we have the topic about decolonization. The previous lesson we talked about the Cold War. You remember that was pretty easy or pretty brief, the same way, and the point was maybe to be oriented at the major proxy wars and major events in the fall of socialism and so on. Of course, the terms in here from dissident to samizdat and so on, we will repeat some of them. We don't have samizdat, do we? Samizdat was illegal literature that was printed and published by dissidents in Eastern Europe. Typical dissidents who did it was Alexander Solzhenitsyn in Soviet Union, Václav Havel here in Czechoslovakia, another famous one, Fedor Galian, Budaj, and so on. Okay. I told you that we will go on with the decolonization. I think that you know these stories again very well. When you just revise the plague tasks we had the previous year, that are made up. So that was kind of like many videos about by John Green about decolonization process. Maybe I added also some specific ones. So the first one was the Cold War and the Venn diagram, and okay, this was part. So decolonization, what countries and conflict areas, why were three things that you should remember from the video. Okay, European Union not today, three worlds, maybe this was interesting thing to summon, and the proxy wars, including like some terrorist organization or deliberation movements from leftist or anarchist side, and so on. Okay, we'll talk also about Arab-Israeli conflict. You remember the video, this land is my land. We may watch it again if we will see. Okay, videos about Asia again with Gandhi and Iran. I tell you some interesting things in here. You need to revise. Okay, Chinese dream and reality. Daniel had another guy from China's People's Republic. So these are things that are many things to study. So I want you to understand the Mao Zedong's policy of communist China and their, weird individualism, and at the same time the spreading of their own way of socialism that is called Maoism. Okay, what else? How it later became like economically more effective, and that's why socialism in China is still there, and kind of etatism and still like factory of the world and so on. Okay, what else? The other stuff was their kind of imperialism within their own territories of Southeast Asia, talking about Tibet, Kashmir, Hong Kong, and Taiwan. I can remember that was a really harsh task for you in June, and even for me to read, because not that everybody like write something important, but for you that would be interesting, because we shall ask you in the oral examination. Okay, about Africa, plenty of things in here. So some of you also had some interesting personalities from here. Okay, fall of Yugoslavia can be also considered of not the colonization process, but something in between, and how the 1990s came in here. Okay, American history, globalization, history of music by Terka. So that was interesting. So let's have a look. Let's have a look at our presentation. So I promised you that we are going to be really fast, and I believe I can get that. Watch the time. So decolonization process sometimes is taught by the Cold War, but I will say that it was all the time the part of it. The main thing what happened was that what we started at the beginning of the school year was the point that 4/5 of the world were ruled by European states, by USA and Japan. So what do we mean? After the Second World War, United Kingdom and France, but also Netherlands or Belgium, were losing their colonies because they were being occupied by Nazi Germany. So in this way, the Second World War helped those countries and their movements to start fighting for the independence again. The other thing, that there were two brand new superpowers, that was USA and USSR. Yeah, USA, they gave up Philippines, but on the other hand, they brought influence to Europe itself with the Marshall Plan, and they start interfering not only in the Western Hemisphere, but also in all around the world, in order to stop spreading socialism. We know that it's called the Truman Doctrine, and that was deployment of American Army and Navy anywhere in the world in order to protect their interests. On the other hand, the Soviet Union, USSR, did the same thing, that they managed to go into Central Europe. They spread socialism to China and Southeast Asia, and they tried to implement in many countries of Africa, which was actually as difficult as creating like a Western democracy in African countries due to their ethnic and religious borders that was difficult to set. So in this way, USSR looked or seemed to be not so aggressive as Americans. They were doing it in more, hidden way, in more clever way, sophisticated way, that they were rather exporting weapons to the countries and movements, fighting against capitalism, and in this way infiltrating and bringing at least some socialistic ideas. Actually, it proved to be that it's not so important, building up socialism and spreading this Lenin's revolution, as it was important for them to have kind of like friendly governments and puppet states, and arrival of resources, for example, but especially like allied countries that can shatter this colonial rule of capitalistic countries. All enemies of Soviet Union and socialism were France, Britain, America, and countries that fought against them were actually weakening them. So for Soviet Union, it was really useful to support Libya, Ghana, Angola, for example, Vietnam, of course, so India. So in this way, they were weakening the power of Western world. So in this way, they did it only in this form of so-called proxy wars, čiže niečo ako zástupné náhradné vojny, in which they were supporting anti-capitalistic, American, for example, governments and so on. The only time they invaded by the Brezhnev Doctrine was invasion of Hungary of 1956. We do not count China yet. And invasion of Czechoslovakia of 1968 actually allowed to create something that we call the Brezhnev Doctrine. Leonid Brezhnev claimed that they invaded Czechoslovakia, the armies of the Warsaw Pact, because socialism in Czechoslovakia was endangered. And just like for Americans in Truman's Doctrine, it is their duty to protect American interests and democracy and capitalism anywhere in the world, they are obliged, they have duty to protect socialism against counter-revolution anywhere that's possible. So that's why in Czechoslovakia their military act was approved by this doctrine of protection of socialism. In this way, they would later invade, for example, Afghanistan, because also the government at the time was not communist, but it was kind of like very leftist, and they introduced some reforms that we may call socialist, and for them it was just like counter-revolution, so they invaded according to the Brezhnev doctrine. Still, on and on, the Cold War depicted in these proxy wars, but for many lands, many countries and movements from Central America, Latin America to Asia and Africa, these proxy wars were kind of the deliberation and decolonization movement, because they were seizing independence one by one. Then when you have like a single country independent, that's Ethiopia, and 1960 or 1961 Ghana. So today we got more than 50 countries in Africa, and still not enough. I would say there can be even like 100 states in Africa at least. Okay, so these two worlds are in here, but at the same time we have some big countries that seized independence, and their rising power and economy and population especially allowed them to have like another powers. They didn't want to create kind of new polar system, but they claimed they wanted to be neutral. And in this order, they established this non-aligned movement, NAM, if you remember from those charts. And that was the case when India, for example, Brazil, for Portuguese, or Indonesia, from a Dutch colony, tried to establish organization like counter bipolar system of the world. Actually, many countries were either neutral, like from Europe, or they were communist with some dictatorship regimes, like Syria, for example. Many were democratic, but from like Latin America, let's say. But many countries still were on either socialist or democratic bloc. Okay, the first country we have to mention is this China, and of course, very quickly, that you need to remember. I'm sorry again. I got a phone call. They have to wait because we got a lesson. So if you remember, I told you about China at the first lesson when we talked about colonial system, when we talk about the Opium Wars, the Boxer Uprising, Tianping Uprising, Taiping Uprising, which were actually kind of these colonial wars in order to control China. Of course, it was impossible to control whole China, but the European powers plus America, Japan, control it in the way of the trade post stations in big cities just like Shanghai, for example. In 1912, General Sun Yat-sen, commander of Chinese army, made coup d'etat in which he proclaimed republic, and the last emperor, a young boy at the time, he went to exile to Singapore, later to Japanese puppet state of Manchuria, or Manchukuo. And what happened when the Soviet Revolution broke up in Russia and in the Soviet Union? So it spread it also to Mongolia, to China, where Communist Party of China started to fight. And against them, of course, it was this Republican government after the death of Sun Yat-sen that was led by Chiang Kai-shek, general of this nationalistic army, and also later leader of political party of Kuomintang. That is very important for us because these guys were the ones who lost and established Taiwan. Okay, Mao Zedong as a leader, cult leader of Communist Party, Chairman Mao, leading and actually building cult of personality around himself in the Civil War, when he managed to fight for a while against Japan, then later on taking on the so-called the Long March, moving to the province when they had better support than the others, actually allowed them that in 1948-49 the communists won, and the Chairman Mao became the dictator of People's Republic of China. The only territory that left under control of Kuomintang was Taiwan. That is island. next to China, and it was protected by American Navy. So that's why Taiwan today is only like accepted by only like couple of countries, like dozens of countries. Now, what else? China experienced a very dramatic period of communist rule of Mao Zedong, during which the red books with his quotes were spread as the only and the best literature ever, so people were actually getting more stupid and so on. Actually, I got one as a souvenir at home. I should bring it to you to see it. It's like Mein Kampf for them, but it didn't contain any like things. They were actually stolen and mixed from Marxist-Leninist ideology together with Confucianism. So that was different. Actually, the economy of China was struggling a lot. So very often Mao just turned the attention from one problem to another. In this way, they proclaimed, for example, that the industrialization doesn't proceed very well. They didn't factories to nationalize, for example, land to collectivize. So that's why they proclaimed the great leap forward, velký skok vpred. That was attempt to build the industry in China, in which he ordered that people should, instead of working in the fields, they should build like high staves, velké pece, vysoké pece, in which they should like melt and forge any iron they found, which made them like trying to be like Iron Age metallurgists, but caused terrible famine and millions of people died. Of course, he accused the other people from this, not himself. The first were Soviets that, according to him, they were kind of sabotaging their attempts. And in times of Leonid Brezhnev seizing power, there was so-called Sino-Soviet split, in which China and People's Republic of China and Soviet Union were in almost in a conflict, and there were some shootings. In and the borders between China and Soviet Union. When we have Slovak lesson, tell me to tell you the joke about this conflict in here. And actually, not I wouldn't say that Cuban crisis was the highest risk of nuclear war, but probably this one, because China already had A-bombs, nuclear weapons at those times. Again, another guys were responsible, not Mao himself, so he proclaimed that there is another thing, and it is Great Proletarian Cultural Revolution. This beautiful name actually means kind of oppression and pogroms against intelligence, in which teachers and middle class, they called bourgeoisie, was responsible for all the failures of China that don't work as a labor class, working class for the good of socialism and all the China. So in this way, another millions of people were killed, were being lynched in the streets, and so on. Actually, this part of this cultural revolution moved to Cambodia, where another communist government of Pol Pot, the dictator leading the Khmer Rouge communist political party, and they accused that everybody wearing the glasses is the bourgeoisie should be killed. There were about 10 million people dead. When Mao died, just like in Soviet Union, they created kind of cult of personality, and many people didn't see this like millions of death, or they said that the slow casualties are inevitable. And in this way, Maoism became actually popular in many countries, from Albania into some crazy people in America and USA. What followed that Mao still is just like Mustafa Kemal, great hero for Chinese communists. He's everywhere, in every room, every building, and on the yuans that are the currency of Chinese Communist Republic. So in this way, they didn't want to deny it like Stalin was denied and his statues were pulled down, because that would deny kind of a rule that anybody who is standing in the and leading in the government of China can be like offended. And this way, it didn't match very well this with this mandate of him and Confucianism of obeying the father, obeying the authorities, and so on. That's why next communist leaders were picked up in more, how to say, effective way, that they realized that China needs great reforms, but they need to be much more tolerant in this way, according to their own people, and allow something, the economy that would motivate a startup. And Chinese are still great businessmen and merchants with small business if they're really cool. So they allow them to, with modernization and also like open economy, still socialist rule, but open market economy. So in this way, they started building. I can remember when I was a little boy, and they were results that suddenly in like late 1980s, we had the best pencil cases, beautiful books from China, made in China, and it was actually mark of quality, high quality in this way. So that was interesting thing, and that was first results of how China is capable of building things that are producing goods that are really good ones. Zhou Enlai and Deng Xiaoping were these communist leaders who were bringing this Chinese communist economy into reforms and allow them to survive. Also, when Soviet Union was falling down and follow socialism in Europe happened in 1989. So students from Chinese universities all tried to organize protests, just like in Czechoslovakia, and they tried to get it in the square of heavenly peace, Tiananmen, which this famous photo is from. And but actually, they were oppressed by Chinese police. The reaction of Chinese communists was that they only opened economy more, and when people had chance to get rich, they didn't mind any political restrictions. And this is very important thing that you need to remember, even understanding today's things happening, maybe in Hungary, maybe in Poland. Something deals with the rise of authoritarian regimes. So sometimes when people are hungry, they don't mind that political rights being oppressed and so on. On the other hand, it provides them kind of like this cultural, economical status that that fulfills their like needs. Something I want to show you is maybe this Maslow diagram, Maslow pyramid. Okay, Maslow pyramid of needs. Maslow pyramid of needs. Is depicting something that we may call, actually this is a nice one, but there are also examples. Okay, that's a cool. I believe you can see it, but not. So I'm uploading it for you. It's divided that firstly you need some basic needs that kind of psychological and for physical state, so physiological needs for air, water, food, shelter, sleep, clothing, reproduction. Usually you can get it. Then you have okay, that's a long one. Continue. So then there are kind of safety needs, so security, safety, maybe some home, and so on. Okay, this is the big one. Okay, so there is any serious difference. Health, property, resources. This is something that our grandparents from the times of after the Second World War didn't have and really needed. Then if you have this, then love, belonging, friendship, intimacy, family, sense of connection. So if you have it, then you need to fulfill this thing. If you have it, okay, then that's what else? Respect at school, respect at your work, for example, self-esteem, status, recognition, strength, and freedom is the last one of these esteems. And only when you have all of these, you can come to like desire to become more than one can be, like self-actualization. It means that you just get better with art, for example, sports, or be the better person. But what I mean, if you don't have the psychological, physiological, safety needs, then you don't care about freedom that is very high in these needs of Maslow hierarchy of needs. So what I wanted to say about China is that when they realize if people are happy with they have like family and food and they can like do well and they can go for a trip, for example, so what more do they need? Like still in like 1 billion populated China, if you vote for somebody, your vote is even smaller than ours, or in any other smaller country. So for them this regime seems to be like cool and okay and surviving. Still, China is communist country in these terms of political regime, and it's connected also with their territorial needs. And what I told you about Taiwan. So Taiwan, as I said, was this Kuomintang territory that is still protected by US Army, doing very well, one of these Chinese tigers, but as I say, recognized, accepted by maybe 12 countries from all around the world. The other two countries, or maybe towns, Macau and Hong Kong, used to be trade stations from 19th century. Macau belonged to Portugal, Hong Kong to United Kingdom, and in the 1990s, that was the end of the treaties that China allowed these two countries to have them as a 1 century long rent. So in this way, when Hong Kong became China again in 1997, so they managed to persuade Chinese to keep the democratic government in Hong Kong, which you see that past more than 20 years, they try to restore it, make it one China, because Hong Kong is still the source of the demonstrations of the resistance against communist China that people are not willing to make the part of it. The way how Chinese try to deal it is with building Shanghai and Beijing and Shenzhen, for example, big, beautiful, like super cities, very modern ones, and also Olympic Games in Beijing in 2008 was kind of demonstration of the wealth and progress and technological advance that they had, and you just don't have to mind. The same thing was with Tibet. Tibet was a kingdom ruled by Buddhist head of the Buddhist religion, and this Mahayana, the Great Road in it. And you know that Dalai Lama at the time was just a little boy. Watched the movie 7 Years in Tibet with Brad Pitt. It's about this invasion of Chinese to Tibet and their occupation, and actually destroying this Buddhist religion. Communists claim that people were actually oppressed by this caste of class of priests, and it was theocracy, and they brought more democracy and more development and education. And it's true that in Tibet they were building many roads and bringing a lot of investments in Lhasa, in the capital of Tibet. The other thing is Kashmir, that is mountainous region of Pamir. That is Pamir and Himalayas with K2, the second highest mountain of the world, and they claim it together with Pakistan and with China, and there are some like interesting battles happening even like a couple of months ago, and soldiers had to fight with cubs and throwing the others from the cliffs because their machine guns are not working. They cannot shoot from them in altitude of 6,000 or 7,000 meters altitude. So that was the thing. But from China, what is important, China was kind of a first domino figure that was moving the others, and Korea and Vietnam. What is interesting, then it stopped after the Vietnam. So let's talk about this one. So Korean War was case that after the Second World War, the Red Soviet Army invaded Mongolia, Manchuria. They helped to liberate large parts of China, and on their march, they also liberated, for example, North Korea and Communist also North Vietnam. What followed? After the war, communists organized in North Korea, and when there was a time, they invaded the South Korea that was liberated by American troops, and they tried to establish here like a kingdom. But kingdom later on fell down. The government that was seized by nationalistic. So even for communists, it was like kind of good pretense. Let's liberate people from oppression of nationalists in here. What followed was that the North Korean army invaded, and they pushed South Korean armies almost to Busan, which is the biggest port in the south. But USA decided to enter the war to help South Korean armies, and what they proposed intervention of United Nations. And what was funny thing, like interesting thing, that in Security Council China didn't have this right to veto at that time, and they actually lost support of Soviet Union. And Soviet Union, Stalin was angry about Mao Zedong, so he said like, okay, we shall like vote for this, and actually they supported in fight against communists. So USA plus, well, I believe about 17 countries from Latin America, but for example Greece, the Kingdom of Greece also sent a lot of soldiers to South Korea and start to fight. And they pushed communist troops back to the north, almost to the Yellow River that was their borderline with China. When Mao Zedong realized that there is danger that North Korean communism may fall down, so he just sent Chinese army who invaded North Korea to help them to fight against South Koreans and Americans and Greeks and United Nations armies. Now, this all happened during only half year and of 1950, and when they put down, so the borderline or the front line was not moving very much more than like 50 kilometers plus minus between like the central part of 38th parallel. So for about 2.5 years, the very famous TV series MASH criticizing Vietnam actually took place in Korea. So that was a place that people are like in this kind of like lost generation style, lost, stuck in a war that is not moving at all, that is completely useless. So let's just divide a country. Of course, both regimes didn't want to surrender. So it took some years when it finally happened. In 1953, so like soon after Stalin's death, communists realized it's good not to fight more on. Americans also were glad with just division of Korea, according to the 38th parallel, so it should be in the index. So since that time there is a borderline in here in which like very strict military zone which made South Korea actually independent and one of these Asian tigers with great economy, car factories like Hyundai, Kia, Daewoo and so on. But North Koreans remaining as like North Korean People's Democratic Republic, the better name, the worse dictatorship, and ruled by dictators of the Kim family, ruling until today, and with not very nice perspective by changing it. South Korea still, you see, one of these three titles. What are these Asians capable of? Okay. We'll talk about Vietnam intervention later on when we talk about American interventions. Now I divided, when we talk about decolonization, I divided it according to the countries they ruled in here. So Britain was the biggest colonial power. As you see, the countries of the British Commonwealth having like all of these. This was actually a situation from after the Second World War. What followed? Soon after the Second World War, especially people from India were loyal soldiers of British Empire defending them in the front lines of Second World War. So as a reward, they expected British to give them independence. So British didn't want to be really bad guys, not fulfilling their duties and promises. So they started with negotiating about independence of India, but that was a big problem. The other countries I'm going to talk about would be South Africa, but what I didn't mention was Canada, that was just having a referendum about their independence. The only thing they left over was the Queen Elizabeth as their the head of the state. Egypt seizing independence soon after with President Nasser, who made alliance with Soviet Union, armed themselves, but their power was destroyed in a couple of wars against Israel. Other countries were giving independence more freely, among them Ghana with Kwame Nkrumah, that you had this guy in the pictures, was actually the first country ignoring actually ethnic borders and giving like nice example that the country can go itself, still with kind of like orientation Soviet Union. But when Queen Elizabeth watched the TV series called The Crown, when there is nice episode about this moment, she visited Ghana and actually she danced with Nkrumah, that was establishing Communist Party and Pioneers Organization and so on. And Queen Elizabeth actually British attitude persuaded some of the countries that it would be good to be friends with United Kingdom, better than to be with wild Soviet Union, really unexpectable things happening in here. So countries just like Zimbabwe, Tanzania, Botswana became more stable than the others, for a while at least, but still disrespecting those ethnic borders and religious borders and having conflicts today, not like 60 years ago, for example. Malaysia sees their independence also being like closely allied to West, for example, Papua New Guinea, Australia, New Zealand, of course, very successful Anglophonic countries in here. Of course, the others remain as small islands and small countries all around the world with kind of like heritage of Britain. So the biggest case was case of India and South Africa. So what happened with India? As I said, that Indians were fighting in both world wars. They're very loyal, very brave warriors. Actually, some of the castas in India, like the Sikhs were actually one of the best warriors in actually history of military, of the world military at all. The leader of the movement for the independence of India was definitely Mohandas Gandhi, called the Mahatma, that means the great spirit. He was a Hinduist from very rich family from the highest caste that studied in Oxford, I think, in the university. He studied law. And just like many Indians, he went living to South Africa. Indians are actually great, how to say, businessmen of Africa. Most of the tailors and businesses are in the ownership of Indians. And here he started his lawyer's practice. Then he clashed with these apartheid troubles, apartheid problems, and also having great education, especially reading book by Henry David Thoreau, The Walden. I have to show it to you if I haven't already. I think that you have it with Mr. Wood this year. Thoreau, Walden. Okay, we got it in here. The book is actually very simple. It's a book that this excellent naturalistic writer, American writer, wrote about his stay at this cabin by the lake in the woods. He spent here a couple of weeks or months. Yeah, also with the statue by the lake, where he was thinking and dreaming, writing life in the woods, like it's good to live with the nature and so on, and realize how is the classical clash, struggle, personal struggle between natural side and feature of human living in the nature, but oppressing, destroying the nature, and on the other hand, he should like be in the life of individual freedom. How can somebody live a freedom in the nature when it comes to meet with people that is inevitable, and had to deal with dictatorship regimes and oppression and paying taxes and restrictions and education and everything that is limiting your individual freedom. And he said that it should be kind of the way that you cannot commit violence against the others, kind of this Buddhist or even Hinduist principles. And in this way, he claimed that people who would like to clash with this maybe oppressive regimes should turn to so-called civic or civil disobedience, občianská neposlušnosť. In this way, he said that you can protest against the government with various forms of non-violent resistance. For example, being on a hunger strike. For example, protesting, sitting down, not fighting. So it's very big difference if the people go protesting for like all for Yan, when they sing songs, for example, they just march and they just like do, the peace symbols or ring with keys. Or when they go and they bring a coffin, and a shallow gallows and throwing like hand grenades and Molotov cocktails. It's like, as you see, that for Kotleba's party, it was really like bad thing because it turned them to be like violent guys. If they were more like civic disobedient, non-violent thing, that would prove them like much better and better in the eyes. And that was something that Henry David Thoreau claimed and found out in this cabin by this beautiful lake. Mahatma Gandhi found this really important. When I'm here, I just check my time. Okay, we got more than 22 minutes. So he found it out that the civic disobedience can be excellent. You've got 1 billion Indians, almost 1 billion Indians living in here, who are buying British goods, who are producing wool for Britain, who are paying taxes, who are obeying the commanders in the military of Britain, and Britain is refusing to give independence to India. So what to do? We can just like refuse it. but in peaceful way. So there are many. He himself went on hunger strike to show that he's like more like hermit, living not in a rich like Jarajesh Kutrapali, but like more in poverty. To give example, as this Hinduistic ascetic hermit. So he was dressing very simple fabric. Still, he got a lot of women around himself. It's claimed that he actually liked the young girls around himself, not too young, but like teenage girls around, and he was like touchy, you know. But still, Gandhi became great symbol that by himself with hunger strikes motivated people not to pay taxes, not to serve in British military, protest in non-violent way in demonstrations, and British didn't know what to do with this. Sometimes there was some shooting, but every time British turned out to be the bad guys. So in this way they had no chance, only to promise and give India peace. And that was a problem then that was brought by Jawaharlal Nehru from other Indian sect, but they were actually guys who represented also ideas of different Indian group, and that was according to religion. Not all Indians were not only of one language, you know, this Hindu is only in this northern part of Aryans, but in the south there are Dravidian languages. But not all of them are Hindus. For example, along the river Indus, these people were Muslims, about 200 million of them. Then also in the delta of Brahmaputra river and Ganga river, what we call today, there were also about like 50 today, like 200 million Muslims. So they claim that also there is some Buddhist territory in here, in Mekong and so on. So they said that India should be probably divided, which caused a lot of conflicts, but they appeared okay. And when their like parliament being chosen by representatives agreed upon independence in 1947, so they very quickly decided, and British just gave hands back. Okay, this is not our case right now. So let's divide India according to these religious groups. But the thing was that during these conflicts, because they appeared, some people wanted to have clean Hindu territories without any Muslims, and they started to organize pogroms against them, killing civilians in millions and millions. So before the borders and independence were set, so they were cleansing in violent way, murdering, massacres of Muslims in Hinduistic India. And the same way when in this part in Pakistan, there were some Hindus, so they're banished with the same cruelty. And these things actually touched most of the families in both countries. So it created probably the biggest hate between two nations in the world, that is between Pakistan and India. If you want to see it, just open YouTube and click, I don't know, Pakistani or Indian national anthem and read the comments from both nations. There are like hostility between Slovaks and Hungarians, or between, I don't know, Dutch and Belgium. It's incomparable to this. This is the worst hate ever, which caused also many conflicts even today, the high risk, because Pakistan becoming the biggest at that time, Indonesia actually prevailed later on, with the highest Muslim population, became this West India that is Muslim. The other Muslim territories were Bangladesh with different people, because these were Pashtuni, these were these original ones. And even in the east there was this Buddhist India called Burma. Today we call it Myanmar, so I have to close my face in here. So this was partition of India, that Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, Burma, Myanmar, and even the South Ceylon, the island of Ceylon, with all three Buddhist, Muslim, and Hinduist groups, with Sri Lanka, that created also terrible civil wars with finally LTT, like Liberation Tigers of Tamil Eelam, fighting in here. India for the defense is much bigger, so Pakistan need to protect. And when India in 1950s who turned mostly to Soviet Union. Actually, Gandhi was refusing that, but Gandhi, for his actually very mild attitude towards Muslims, became a target for radical Hindus. Who one of them, he killed him, he shot him. So this is how Mahatma Gandhi became also the legend, the martyr for the freedom and tolerance for free and tolerant India. Jawaharlal Nehru, after him, here in the picture, he moved mostly to Soviet Union later on, so that made USA believe that they need to make these forces equal. And when India asked Soviet Union to be like get a technology of creating A-bombs, so Americans provided some A-bomb missiles to Pakistan. So suddenly we have two crazy countries with terrible hate, religious problem, both of them having nuclear weapons. Very often, especially here in Kashmir, not only China, but especially Pakistan and India fighting for this region, mountains of the Himalayas are the biggest problem. Okay, so that was India, with highly dramatically rising population. I'll check the time I have. Okay, 15 minutes. So very quickly. Okay, the other country I promised to tell you about was South Africa, because we got a couple of important personalities, just like Nelson Mandela, Frederick de Klerk, or Desmond Tutu. South Africa was a country, again, sorry for phone. South Africa was, of course, country with the indigenous population, and it was discovered by Portuguese, but later on Portugal lost many of their colonies due to the Netherlands. And this big country with very good, nice climate became excellent place for settling of the Dutch farmers and settlers. And in the Dutch language, farmer means boer. Boer means peasant, farmer. These Boers were arriving in large numbers and expanding from the colony in Cape Town and spreading further to the inlands, where they usually killed out these black African tribes and starting building up their own states. There were three together. It was Cape Colony, then there was Free Orange State, Slobodný Oranský štát, and Transvaal, so over the valley, country of the valley. These three countries are speaking Afrikaan language. Afrikaan language is mixture of the old ancient Dutch language, a lot of English words, and many African words from Zulu and Bantu languages that are main dominant ethnic groups in South Africa. In 19th century, United Kingdom, claiming these lands, occupied the Cape Town and created their own Cape Colony, which is all this blue color, as you can see in here. But these African states remain independent, and many Africans, many Boers, moved to this Transvaal and Free Orange State, which made UK to attack them and occupy them. But Boers were not, guys from the other thing. They were actually very intelligent, smart guys with a lot of support from their homeland, but especially rising power of Germany, who sent them a lot of weapons. Also, these Boers, in three Boers wars at the beginning of 20th century, managed to cause a lot of terrible casualties to British Army, who fought them with two things: with cleansing war, total war, and building concentration camps for their families. And this partisan war couldn't go further on, so the Boers accepted the dominance of British Empire. On the way, they could keep some of their privileges in here. Among them, that was segregation between white and blacks, despite Zulu or Bantu were very strong, but still this racist policy of segregation of black population from the whites remained here. So apartheid, as we call it, this racist policy, South Africa by the Boers, was accepted by British rule. In the Second World War, a lot of South African Boers were fighting for the Britain rule, so in 1956 there was absolutely no problem. Another episode from the TV series The Crown, Elizabeth II actually was the one that supported African countries with bringing embargo, it means like economical blockade on South Africa, in order to push them and force them to stop with apartheid in 1980s. Margaret Thatcher, the Prime Minister of British government, was refusing that. She didn't mind. She cared on the economy and nothing else. And actually the Queen was the one that tried to persuade that there are some high moral principles that we should respect. What was happening? South Africa was country divided, like you see in this very bad resoluted picture. Strandan, Zen, Blanques, Bigency, whites only. There were schools, neighborhoods, work jobs only for white people. If some people claim today that, yeah, but it's good country, but blacks are with high crime and AIDS and drug abuse. Yeah, because they're living for decades in segregation, just like Roma people in Slovakia. If there is segregation, logically, there's people are you're not going to kill them all. It's like this. So there no education means high crime and high natality and so on. What happened that as example, I told you that a lot of Indians were living in Africa. So here. People got motivated by Indian National Congress as the self-called, self-determined parliament in India. So they start to organize also in themselves in African National Congress. Their leader, Nelson Mandela, was immediately imprisoned, and he spent in prison for about, I don't know, 30 or 40 years of his lifetime. So as you see, these white Boers were keeping this country strictly and using this Cold War. In times when there was like hesitation, in times of like Jimmy Carter presidency, for example. So South Africa invaded Angola, in which there was a big communist movement, and they managed to defeat them. So during in times of Cold War, South Africans were using this situation like we are still better ally for Americans and for Britain, despite being racist, than anybody else, because we are the most powerful country in Africa in here, and we can defeat any communist movement around. So that was the thing that they had to wait until the Cold War was over. When I was a young boy, I can remember Nelson Mandela giving speeches from prison, and only when the pressure from West, especially after the fall of Soviet Union, who stopped supporting Angola, there was no need for any proxy wars anymore. So even in America, by George Bush and the war in Iraq, there was high pressure, European Union being united. So there was really high pressure on South African Boers to release this apartheid regime. And when new president Frederick de Klerk became the president, he proclaimed there would be free elections. He set Nelson Mandela free, who became the next president of South Africa, and Desmond Tutu, bishop of Catholic Church in South Africa, kind of peace activist, proclaimed that that would be the end. With these free elections, African National Congress won, and they proclaimed South Africa be a free country for all races. And that was the end of the apartheid regime. South Africa also introduced new flag that was combination of, as you can see, this Dutch African flags together with the colors of Africa, Rastafarian movement of African National Congress. So unity of white and blacks. I'm showing this trophy from Football World Cup Championships. That is that Nelson Mandela was holding when South Africa just try out to organize the World Cup Championship, and they did. They were given this chance in 2010. Slovakia was playing there for the first time, and it was a great story. I can tell you that not only these football teams of South Africa after 1994, 1998 in France, in this 2010, but also their rugby team, for example, cricket team today. It's actually a mixture of black, white, dark, I don't know, Indian, pale, whatever color, and they're actually having no problems. So whites suddenly became open-minded, of course, except of a couple of white farmers in the central part. They still are racist, organizing their own militia, and actually afraid that they will lose their farms. But the thing is that they had lost those farms like no, they had stolen those land from the black people from Zulu like 160 or 50 years ago. So just like we had this land reform in Czechoslovakia, and we took it back from nobility and give it to the other people. So probably Africa needs the same thing. And also with accepting some autonomy, religious and autonomies, and when don't persecute the others, so probably they can live together. But the thing, and very important point, that you have to give education for everybody. That's why I gave you plenty of movies about Africa that you found maybe very bad. Also about the guy who built this water, like windmill tower, and allow like irrigation of fields and so on. Okay, I'll check the time. I'll check the time. Okay, we got only like 7 minutes, so that would be really fast speech about Arab-Israeli conflicts. This is another big problem that after the war, Second World War, British promised Jews to create their own state of Israel, which didn't came true. Actually, they had this mandatory state of Lebanon and Palestine in 1930s, and under the rule of British, it became kind of like a nice land to move back from Europe for nationalist Jewish immigrants from Europe, from these Beitar organizations, if you remember. And when they came to these regions, like how to say, fanatic religious believers, they start with persecution of Arabs in these lands and Muslims, and they start to organize in terrorist organization called Irgun. And this Irgun started with banishing Arabs from Jerusalem, from Tel Aviv, Haifa, and so on. British actually army tried to set this peace off, but during the war, what Nazi caused in Holocaust, it caused huge immigration of surviving Jews. About like 3 million Jews came on British ships and actually occupying all these lands. Not only Beitars, but even Hapoel Jews who start to build first collective farms called kibbutzes, and being more tolerant, but in this way they wanted to proclaim independent state. And finally United Nations proclaimed with support of Soviet Union, because they believe Israel, thanks to Hapoel's, may be socialist country, which didn't happen, so was proclaimed in February 1948, because the situation was getting very dramatic. The thing was that now many Jews started banishing Arabs, Palestinian Arabs, from these territories, which caused immediately like conflicts. And already in 1947-48, this brand new state of Israel with its white color had to fight against surrounding Arabic countries, because they knew that they are banishing Arabs from these. Immediately, this plan of 1947 gave Israel the territories that would divide it between Jews and between Muslims, Palestinian Arabs with green color. The point was that Israel won in each and every war, and if they had a chance, secretly, openly, they took over also some lands from these Palestinian territories. So as you can see on these other maps of 1949 till 1967, till the wars of Yom Kippur and 6 Days War, they actually occupied all these lands in the north and from Jerusalem and so on. What they left to Palestinians were kind of autonomous regions of West Bank of Jordan and the Stripe of Gaza, Pasmo Gazi a Zapadný breh Jordánu. Still, there are other wars against Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Iraq, against Lebanon, caused that Israel, always with the support of USA, they won, which caused that, as I said, that these lands were occupied by Israel until today, despite they should have been given autonomy or maybe independence. Because Palestinians didn't see any perspective when even Lebanon gave up. Egypt finally made peace with Israel. In Jordan, the very tolerant dynasty, royal dynasty, started to rule. In Syria, even the President Assad, gave up fighting against Israel. They didn't see any chance how to seize their independence, only to start out with terrorist warfare. They just took over from Irgun. And this is the way when in 1970s Yasser Arafat, here in the picture, built a PLO, like Palestinian Liberation Organization, po slovensky nazveme OOP, alebo Organizácia oslobodenia Palestíny, in which he started to fight with terrorist warfare, with kidnapping airplanes, with hijacking people, and organizing suicidal attacks. And in this way, especially after his death, this PLO divided according to their mostly religious differences with Sunnite or Shia Islam into Fatah, Hamas, and Hezbollah. All of them had their basements in Lebanon, for which Lebanon was being under regular attacks from Israel with rockets. About 2 million Palestinian refugees living only in Lebanon, other millions in Syria and Jordan and in Egypt. which causing another like dramatic situation. These people living in camps, in tents, and rising in here, even the West in Gaza or Jordan, West Bank of Jordan, living in terrible situation with no proper education, without any humanitarian help. So what can rise from these people? Only new and new terrorists and new black widows, and this unstoppable warfare. What happened when the Cold War was over? There was another possibility, another situation in here in which Yitzhak Rabin and Shimon Peres, two leaders of Israel, became more tolerant towards Israel. Guys, I need to check up the time because I'm afraid that I already started my lesson. No, it's 10:30. Okay, so I'm okay with this. But we have the last minute. So what I mean to do, in 1990s, just like in South Africa, even in Israel, there was a new more democratic attempts when Shimon Peres, for example, and Yitzhak Rabin here in the picture tried to organize, make peace with Yasser Arafat, who gave up fighting, also lost support from Soviet Union, Czechoslovakia using Semtex, our CZ-58 rifles, automatic rifles. So they gave up this terrorist warfare, and that was a challenge. When they got terrorist warfare, Israeli were more tolerant to give them autonomy. These treaties, you see that Bill Clinton, American president, supporting this was a chance that Palestine can be free again. What happened that Shimon Peres died and Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated by a radical Jew, Orthodox Jew, who believed that he's a traitor, that he's wanted to make peace with Muslims. Again, how many times we had this situation that you want to make peace, be tolerant, and you're killed by another fanatic. And that was the end. Since that time, Benjamin Netanyahu was the prime minister and president of Israel for many years with very conservative government and occupying more and more lands from Palestinians, and it's a really terrible thing. And Intifada coming back again, and that's the thing why Islamistic terrorism rise again, because Palestine is there and Palestine is not free. Okay guys, so that's all from me, that video, and next lesson we'll move on other countries guys. So have a nice weekend, pekný víkend vám prajem decka. No, to je z mojej strany všetko. Na zistenie absencie som vám dal nejakú otázku, takže prosím vás, odpíšte, pozrite si, čo som vám písal. Pravdepodobne cez Facebook sme išli, takže tam si pozrite otázku, odpovedzte, aby som vedel, že ste boli na hodine. To je z mojej strany všetko, decka. Have a nice weekend. Bye bye.